when you have a change of heart that I am going to refuse to dehumanize people with whom I disagree. I'm going to understand that as much as I may vehemently dislike every policy idea you have, underneath your picture is still the word beloved. Man, that rubs so many people the wrong way, and it shouldn't.
From Christianity Today, you're listening to The Bulletin, a podcast about the people, events, and issues that are shaping our world. I'm Clarissa Mall, producer and moderator of The Bulletin. How does the Electoral College actually work? Why does America have a two-party system? How much do presidents actually impact housing prices? These questions and more arrive day after day at the desk of Sharon McMahon, America's government teacher. From her classroom as the social media moniker Sharon Says So, McMahon serves up nonpartisan, fact-based information to help followers become more informed, historically grounded citizens. Her podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting, ranks in the top 1% of all podcasts, and her new book, The Small and the Mighty, releases in September. In this episode, Sharon sits down with Mike Cosper to talk about civil discourse and critical thinking while engaging in political conversation. Welcome to the show.
Sharon McMahon, welcome to the Bulletin.
My pleasure.
For folks who may not be familiar with you and your work, who is Sharon McMahon? Who is Sharon Says So? And where did this social media presence, platform, concept, where did all that come from in the first place?
Well, I've been a classroom teacher for a very long time and taught in some of the, some amazing places, but I spent a long time teaching in Washington, D.C., teaching government in Washington, D.C., where you can just get on the train and go down to the Supreme Court and be like, let's go meet with our congressperson, bring $5 for lunch. Being a government teacher in that environment is a very unique and specific experience because a huge percentage of your students, their parents work for the government. If their preferred party is in power, they probably work for the government. And if they're not, then they are working at a think tank. And then they switch when the parties switch in power. That's how that works. Yeah. So this really, the genesis is many years as a classroom teacher, helping students learn how to think critically about issues, without pushing my own personal agenda on what those issues are. Most teachers would much rather have students who disagree with their viewpoint, but who can make a strong case for why they think what they think, than have a student who just parrots back talking points they might agree with. The second one doesn't indicate any actual understanding of something. You can't write a really persuasive essay if you don't understand how a situation works or what the facts are. So the genesis is years as a classroom teacher. And then I got started really on social media doing what I'm doing now as a result of a couple of pieces of misinformation floating around the internet around the 2020 election. Maybe you noticed this, Mike. Maybe you noticed some misinformation on the internet. Misinformation like when people graduate from the Electoral College. Things like that, where that's not, but wait a second, that's not real. You can't graduate, it's not a place. The Electoral College is not a university that you can graduate from. It's not a place you can visit. These are things that are just demonstrably false.
But or like the secret constitution that was floating around during the 2020 election. Like there was an off the record, or I'm not sure what the language exactly was, but I remember hearing about it on Reddit.
Oh, yes. Yes. The secret constitution, that one was about how the United States was actually formed as a corporation, and power of the corporation had been signed over to thus and such. That also was not real. So it turns out that there's just a fundamental misunderstanding sometimes about how a very complicated thing works. The United States government is complicated. It's intentionally complicated. It was created complicated on purpose. It's big and it's unwieldy. And there were a lot of people who were just really confidently wrong on the internet. Anyway, I just started making nonpartisan fact-based explainer videos about how things actually worked, because you can't change something you don't understand.
I come into this conversation as a journalist. I feel like my responsibility as a journalist is to tell the truth no matter what, to try to be as balanced as possible, like to punch in both directions when the need is necessary and all of that. But my environment is definitely not the same as yours. Your environment as a social media environment, it's a totally different place. It's a totally different demographic. Let's say you punch right one day and you punch left the next. And that's one of the things I've noticed about your work is I think it is pretty fair. It is pretty balanced. What are you hearing back from your followers and your listeners? Is the assumption, oh, you're in the pocket of big right-wing media, or you're in the pocket of big oil, or you're in the pocket of the left, or whatever? What are you hearing on a regular basis?
Most people are actually super nice. And most people are like, hey, I'm really grateful for your work. And I am so glad that I found you. And that's what the overwhelming majority of people say. But of course, that's not everyone. I recently put up a post that this was shortly after somebody tried to assassinate Donald Trump. And I put up a post being like, now is not a time for you to be like, oh, I wish they didn't miss. That is uncalled for. That is not how you act, right? That is not how you should act. This person is somebody's father. Like, you should not treat any person that way, right? No, we're not doing that. Well, that upset some people. They viewed that I was being nice to Donald Trump, and they didn't like that.
What's so interesting about that is you weren't being nice to his policies. It was about him as a human being. Yeah. Like, man, it would be a real bummer for his children and grandchildren and spouse and, et cetera, that he would be taken from this earth by an assassin's bullet.
Right. Should we be wishing anyone to be shot? That's absurd to me, right? That's absurd to me. Even if you strongly disagree with everything he's ever done, including the socks he chose to wear this morning, even if that's your viewpoint, you should still not be wishing that he gets shot. And that doesn't seem controversial to me, but apparently it is. Apparently it is. To me, it's just basic human decency that when somebody is going through a really difficult time, that we treat them with dignity. We can talk about his policies. How about when he has recovered from his injuries? How about that? And he's back on the campaign trail. We can debate and discuss his policies. And then the opposite is true. Like, I recently interviewed Tim Walz, the VP candidate on the Democratic side. And there's a lot of people in those comments who are like, you're so nice to him. Why were you so nice? They're mad that I'm too nice. But neither side wants me to be nice to the other side. And any amount of niceness is viewed as favor. Right? Like, I agree with everything you've ever done. Wow. To some people, that's what's required for basic human decency, is that I agree with everything you've ever done. And I just don't think that's true. I just don't think that's how we should be conducting ourselves on the internet or in society. I think people are, we've spent way too much time dehumanizing people who have different viewpoints than we do. And that's a really dangerous place. Dehumanization has never led us somewhere worth going.
Well, and the nature of tribalism is you're with me or against me. And, it's one thing to say that in the middle of a war on whatever. It's another thing to say that about an election or about party constituencies and to think that, hey, because you're on the other side of this issue regarding fiscal questions or taxation or debt or whatever, to go, you're with me or against me, rather than you're my fellow citizen, you have a different point of view. Let's figure these things out. Let's figure out how we live together, which is kind of the nature of politics. It's
really interesting that people continue to wish ill for a leader who is already in power. When two people are competing for a position, that's one thing. You can say, I really hope they lose. I really don't like any of their ideas. I don't want them to get elected. That's one thing. But when somebody is already elected and they're already in office, you can maintain your disagreement with their policies and their positions while still wishing for their success, right? Because their success is America's success, especially when we're talking about the presidency. I think it's wrong for people who disagree with President Biden, who's currently in office, to wish ill upon him, because his success is America's success. Why would you want America to not be successful? Right? And the same thing is true when Trump was in office. We should wish for Trump's success. And I don't mean personal success. I don't mean like enrichment. I don't mean that they get all of their policy agendas through. I'm not asking for agreement, but it's a posture. It's a manner of treating somebody else. That your success is our success, Madam President or Mr. President. And so, I'm going to act accordingly. It doesn't mean we don't hold power to account or we don't have the right to criticize what they're doing. We can and we should criticize their actions if they say something we disagree with or do something we disagree with. But if our intent is to harm, which too often it is, that is a very poor place to lead from.
I think part of it is this idea that, and this is something we talk about a lot on this podcast, part of it is this thing where it's like politics becomes a substitute for religion, for identity, for all the ways that we sort of have a sense of self, have a sense of team, have a sense of community. And so it's not just, I want to win, it's I want to win and you have to lose. Ultimately, it's a no-win situation. It's so destructive to being able to even do the work of journalism or do the work of history and kind of tell the truth, because people will resent you for telling the truth one way or the other if you're not damaging enough to the other side.
I've said this a million times, and I'm just going to keep banging this drum, which is that America and no country can work for the destruction of half of its citizenry. And it cannot work for the destruction of another political party. I'm not talking about the Nazi party, but I'm talking about one of the main political parties has a long history in the United States. I would actually argue that we need more than two political parties. Most healthy democracies have more than two, but that's a topic for another day. But one party in a country, that's an authoritarian government, Mike, right? That's actually North Korea. That's Russia. That's Nazi Germany. Right. One political party, that's not a healthy democracy. We need more than one healthy political party in order to have a healthy democracy, because somebody has to oppose those in power. That is an important check on the system. That's what keeps somebody from running away and declaring themselves a dictator. So the idea that our job is to somehow destroy the tribe that we are not currently a part of is really antithetical to the idea of upholding democracy. If you are a fan of democracy, as I am, the goal cannot be to destroy one party and everyone who espouses those ideas.
But every YouTube video is so-and-so destroys whoever the competition is, right? Because we do think of it as a team sport, and we put it in all these ways. The other thing is the extent to which we sort of dramatize and radicalize the way we talk about other people. Donald Trump is a lot of things, and he deserves criticism for all kinds of reasons. However, he is not Adolf Hitler. He has not written Mein Kampf. He is not advocating the wholesale destruction of an entire race of people. There are all kinds of ways we could say, look, he's not a Nazi. But if you go online and say, look, Trump's not a Nazi, people will go, what are you talking about? He's terrible. And it's because we think in these absolute black and white terms. And again, back to this sort of, if you're not with us, you're against us thing. And it's incredibly destructive. So I appreciate so much what you're saying, and I appreciate so much what you do. And I think this is one of the things that is so magnetic about your platform and your work is your intentional way of going, here's the history, here's where this comes from. Let's create a deeper context for people who like history, who like reading, who like ideas. It's an incredibly attractive thing.
Thanks.
Okay, you wrote a book, The Small and the Mighty. Tell us, the classic question every author loves to get. What's your book about?
It's about 12 unsung Americans who changed the course of history. And, so often the history books are full of the people who have the most money and the most ships and the most guns and the most military conquests and who became the president and who started a steel company and were the king of England. And, all those people are certainly worth learning about. Yes. But so often those dominant sons of history, they eclipse the beautiful auroras that are there at night when we get up early and we can see them in the pre-dawn hours. And so often those stories, the ones that are eclipsed by those dominant sons, have done far more to shape the character of the nation than a handful of dudes. There's literally hundreds of thousands of incredible stories that one could tell that are not this dude built this thing that one time. And that's not the shame of the dudes who did the things. That's all well and good. But I am kind of George Washington out at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I have heard about him every single year of my life, every single year of school. But what about the people who did other things? Why are we not telling their stories? And I find it interesting to uncover who they were and what they did.
Who jumps out? I mean, obviously you said there's 12 in the book. Probably like picking a favorite child. Yeah. You're not supposed to have one, but you probably secretly do. So,
well, I don't have a favorite child, but there is one person that jumps out at me as being somebody whose ideas are really applicable to this moment in history. And her name is Septima Clark. And she was born in 1898, born to formerly enslaved family members. And she became a teacher at a time when Black teachers were not even allowed to work in Charleston, South Carolina public schools. Didn't matter who you were teaching. If you're teaching other Black children, you just were not allowed to work here. We don't hire you. So she goes and gets a job on one of the barrier islands off the coast of South Carolina. She gets a job in a school called Promised Land School. And the school is basically falling down. It doesn't have any glass in the windows. They only have shutters to keep the bugs out. And of course, in South Carolina, there are bugs. And so very often, the children would be having school in the actual dark, with no materials, with no resources. And their families are desperately poor, so poor that often children were dying from contagious illness that had been largely controlled in other populations. And I have no doubt that she did not look around that school and think, well, this is the promised land. It clearly was not. And she would have had every opportunity, every reason to look around that school and see nothing but the inequalities, the structural inequalities present that provided resources for one race and not the other, the beliefs that underpinned this entire system of white supremacy. She would have had every opportunity to be confronted with that on a daily basis. And throughout the course of her life, she had many experiences that most of us would probably not want to trade places with. She gets married, discovers that her husband has a secret second family, and is actually married to a different woman with different kids. She has a baby that dies a few weeks after birth from a birth defect. She goes on to have another child, and then shortly after discovering her husband has this secret second family, he dies, leaving her a single woman at a time when it was very difficult for women to provide for their children. Quite literally. They just were not allowed to have most jobs, and Black women were particularly
Especially
not allowed to have most jobs. And she becomes so depressed that she nearly commits suicide and is sort of saved at the last moment from committing suicide. Multiple times, she is almost killed in accidents, like I'm talking bus crashes, car crashes, plane crashes. People try to firebomb her house. She is fired from her job. She is falsely arrested for something she did not do. And that totality of circumstances, most of us would not sign up for, right? We would not be like, you know what? I'd love to trade places with her for a day.
Most of us wouldn't survive.
No, that's right.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But one thing that Septima had that I think so many of us are, we would look at that and think, well, she had no hope. She had no hope of making a better life. She had no hope of feeling like she was doing anything impactful. What Septima had was hope. And it was not a feeling that she experienced. She did not wake up one morning with all of the birds chirping and the sun shining in the sky and feel to herself like, wow, things are really looking up, right? Because day after day after day, things were not looking up. But she chose to have hope despite her current circumstances. And I think that's one of the things that I hope people take away from this book is that hope is not a feeling that we're waiting to experience, which we have, I think so many of us have come to believe that it's a feeling we're waiting to experience, when in reality, it is a choice that we make to have hope. And Septima goes on to do something truly remarkable with her life that, again, when she walked into Promised Land School, she had no idea that someday that the civil rights movement as we know it in the United States would not have existed without her. She goes on to teach a woman named Rosa Parks. And she creates an incredible system of citizenship schools that move thousands and thousands of Black voters onto the voter rolls, teaches them how to read, teaches them how to, use public transportation, how to write a letter to their elected official. And I won't even give away the entire story. But at the end of her life, somebody asks her, what have you learned from all of these experiences? And the thing that she says is something that I'd like there to be signs, billboards on the Beltway around Washington, D.C. I would like it to be inside the U.S. Capitol. She says, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. That's a message that we need.
Yeah.
How would your enemy ever have a change of heart if you don't spend any time with them? Under what circumstances would they be like, Mike, I really realized after surrounding myself with all of the YouTube videos that are taking you down and calling you stupid, I really realized, in fact, I've had a change of heart. Mike's really great after all. How would your enemy ever change their mind if you spend no time with them? Right? So this idea that your enemy, your quote unquote enemy, whoever is opposing your efforts on whatever it is, the idea that they need to be cut out of your life, that you should not spend time with them, that their ideas are terrible and we can't associate ourselves with bad ideas. If I talk to you and we disagree on a topic, then by extension, I am tainted. Have you noticed this, Mike, that if you spend time with somebody who disagrees with you on a topic, whatever it is, that you are viewed by some people as tainted? You have, their issue that makes them a terrible person has rubbed off on you, and you by extension are now a terrible person.
As somebody who has been connected to the conservative movement in many ways since long before 2016, 2016 was a profound pivot point for a lot of us, because if you didn't make the pivot to sort of welcome the Trump phenomenon into it, maintaining friendships inside the movement with people who did has been extremely difficult. And I'm fortunate. I can point to a handful of them. I won't call them out here because they don't want to get yelled at on Twitter for being my friend, but they're still my friends. And I'm thankful for those people. That is such a critical point. In fact, in many ways, it was easier to have friends on the left prior to Trump than it is to have friends on the right after Trump. It's just kind of anathema in our cultural moment.
You're exactly right. And I have heard from so many thousands of people whose families have truly been ripped apart by the current political climate. They can't even have Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving gives them such tremendous anxiety that they can't enjoy it. The moment is so fraught that it has ripped families and friendships apart. I look at everything a woman like Septima Clark went through, and at the end of her life, she was not full of grievance. She did not keep a list of wrongs. Instead, she said, I've learned that I can work with my enemies. not because she was going to adopt the ideologies of her enemies, not because their bad ideas rubbed off on her, but because you never know when they might have a change of heart at any moment.
So if you were talking to somebody who said, okay, I get it, but where do I even start? One of the challenges we have in the moment that we're in is it's not just that people are polarized online. People are polarized in everyday life. Like, it's very easy to go through your day and never encounter someone who doesn't think and vote and watch television and follow the same people on social media as you do. So if you could sort of wave a magic wand for the sake of democracy, or prescribe for somebody, hey, here's some ways to think about building some bridges or connecting with people who look different than you, who think different than you, what would that look like from where you sit?
It fundamentally begins with a change of heart, right? And of course, that's the most difficult thing to create public policies around. We can't be like, the policy is be nice, right? Like that's not the policy.
Right.
Sometimes people, mix up what's possible with public policies and what needs to happen with a change of heart. But here's the beauty of this change of heart though, Mike, is that we don't need to wait for somebody to come fix it for us. There's no dude on a white horse that needs to come galloping in with a message of like, I have the plan. We don't need to wait for that person. We can have our own change of heart and begin creating our own change here and now, like this afternoon. And this, you're listening to this, you can decide to change. And so when I say a change of heart, what I don't mean abandon your idea, abandon your principles, abandon your beliefs. What I mean is change how your heart is oriented towards people you disagree with. I saw somebody somebody who is like a pastor of a church, put up a post on Instagram the other day that had, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump next to each other, like on a split screen, and put, underneath each of their names, put the word beloved. And boy, people did not like that. People did not like that, Mike. They did not like it.
I shouldn't laugh that hard, but oh my gosh. It's
they were
so
big mad about that. How dare you say that person is beloved? They are obviously not. You know what I mean? But to me, they obviously are. You know what I mean? So the idea that one person is beloved or favored and the other person is cast out or is condemned, that's not true. And when we have a change of heart that allows us to see sort of this big picture, that's really how to start. Is your crazy uncle who constantly wants to pick fights with you at Thanksgiving about some political figure that he knows is going to get your goat? He knows what buttons to push, and it's a hobby. Some people just really enjoy that. And when you have a change of heart that I am going to refuse to dehumanize people with whom I disagree, I'm going to understand that as much as I may vehemently dislike every policy idea you have, underneath your picture is still the word beloved. Man, that rubs so many people the wrong way, and it shouldn't.
That's good. Well, I commend the book to folks. It's a compelling read in the sense that it's empowering. And I guess the last question I'll ask you about it is part of the reason why you're focused on these sort of unsung heroes. Is it to remind people that, like, look, you might not think you can have a significant impact, but there are downstream consequences to everything?
I mean, I think so. I hear from people every day, and I get over 10,000 DMs a day, Mike. That's not an exaggeration. Goodness. That's not a pie in the sky number. I receive over 10,000 DMs a day.
And you read and respond to everyone. So everybody go DM her right now.
Michael. Thank you for your thoughtful, kind words. But let me tell you, a significant majority of them come from people who feel hopeless. They come from people who feel like I'm politically homeless in this world, that this two-party binary does not serve me
100%.
at all. I do
Yep.
not feel well represented in government. I look around and I see a bunch of yahoos on television wasting my tax money. They look around and see little evidence for hope. Little evidence that what they're doing matters. Little evidence that, if I volunteer for this, or I help that person with X, that will matter in the grand scheme of things at all. It's
Yeah.
a really normal way to feel. If you feel that way, you're not alone. I hear that so often. But I will tell you that, as I previously mentioned, Septima Clark and other people in this book did not show up at their job that day at Promised Land School and think to themselves, wow, I am really making a difference here. Everything hinges on me. That's not how they felt. In fact, she went on to feel suicidal. But what she did was continue to choose to hope that what she was doing would matter to someone someday. That's not true of just a handful of people in books. That's true of every single one of us, that what we do actually really does matter. And you may not be aware of all of the ways in which it matters now and all of the ways in which it will matter in the future. That does not mean that it doesn't matter. Your small actions actually can lead to mighty things.
I think one of the most defeating things for people is that they buy into this sort of like great man of history theory, where it's like, if you can't change the world, then, what are you here for? And it's like, no. Every time you see some person, including some of the most notorious people of our current moment, they are the product of a whole community, a whole network of people who kind of influenced, shaped, formed. I think oftentimes in times of spiritual formation, they were, for better or worse, there were people in their lives who were impacting them on that level of spiritual formation that made them who they are. It's why it's worth continuing to show up, and in the language of the recovery world, like doing that next right thing. Like that's it. That's the thing. And having confidence that there's, obviously we're Christianity today, we're big on providence, which means that we're big on the idea that like the role we play is part of a larger story. And I think your book illustrates that concept just beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The thing I wanted to ask you about before you go, can you tell our audience a little bit about your grant program for teachers?
Yeah. As a longtime classroom teacher, I am very, very familiar with what a challenging environment it is to work in right now. And honestly, the way we treat teachers says a lot about how we feel about kids. If you care about kids, you have to care about the people who work with kids. Obviously, teachers are underpaid and have always been underpaid. That's not new news to anybody. My first teaching job, I made $26,000. Okay, you can make more than $26,000 working at Chipotle, and that's not even an exaggeration.
Yeah.
So teachers are underpaid, of course. But they're also incredibly under-resourced in other ways. They're under-resourced in many other financial ways, in terms of like, they're not even given the basic supplies to do their job. The expectation is you will purchase your own supplies to do your job, to give to the children that you serve. It's a little bit like, imagine working at a hospital, and I have, multiple family members who are nurses, and the hospital saying, oh, you didn't bring your own sterile surgical dressings? Oh, well, I guess you're going to go without. That's absurd. Of course, the hospital should provide those because they're integral to patient care, right? And the same thing is true of educational supplies. We're talking about basic necessities. But this is one of the things I hear so often from teachers, and we have tens of thousands of teachers who apply for our teacher grant programs, is how much money they spend feeding children every year. Personal money. And you might say, well, we have the school lunch programs and things like that. We do, and those are great. Those are important. Some schools don't offer school breakfast. Some schools do. And for some children, lunch is the only reliable meal they're getting on a daily basis. Their family doesn't have money for snacks, or their parents are not present enough to purchase snacks for them. Their parents are struggling with addiction issues, or whatever it is. They may not have a stable home life of somebody who can say, I got you this giant thing of goldfish. brings some to school every day, or here's some apples. Teachers are spending, on average, over $800 a year on school supplies. And that's not even counting the amount that they're spending on food. These are actual children who are dependent on food, nutrition that they're getting at school. So every year we have a teacher grant program that people can apply for. We give out $500 teacher grants to people who are speech pathologists, school librarians, school counselors, teachers, other school professionals, to be able to serve children, the least of these in our society, who we should all have a vested interest in caring for.
How much have you all been able to give away over the last few years, if you don't mind sharing?
Almost $2.5 million.
That's extraordinary.
All just crowdfunded. We don't have any giant corporate donors. I think we're talking about people in the community saying, here's $5, here's 50 cents. Some people saying, here's $200. According to their own resources, they're able to contribute. They're able to see and feel like whatever they're able to do is part of something bigger and important.
My wife's a teacher. She teaches first grade and fortunately is in an environment where there's some affluence or whatever. But like most teachers, she's underfunded. And so at the beginning of the school year, she has an Amazon wish list for her parents. And it's like, here are things we need for the classroom every year, et cetera. Her best friend, my friend Carrie is a teacher in an inner city public school a few miles away from us. And Carrie actually was a recipient of one of your grants.
Oh.
So Carrie's wish list, when her year starts off, her wish list is things like soap, tampons, deodorant, basic necessities
hygiene,
that these kids aren't getting at home, aren't getting at all. And so she was able to supply her classroom with a bunch of books that middle school kids love and that she would have never gotten any other way. Both because she's underfunded and because, when funds come in, there's a sense of priority and necessity to these hygiene issues, these issues of poverty that you would think public schools, they ought to be able to take care of something like that or figure out a way to supply it. And they
don't. Very often they really do not. And then that also contributes to absenteeism, especially when you start getting into middle school, where you realize that I cannot go to school like this. I don't have clean clothes. I don't have a backpack. I don't have something to eat for lunch. The humiliation from not having what you need is real. And children not wanting to attend school actually impacts the entire community. A well-educated population impacts us all for the better.
I'll never forget, I was at a dinner a few years ago where I was sitting at a table and there was someone at the table who was involved with a nonprofit that worked with a missionary organization that did supplying for schools overseas. And they started talking about how one of the number one issues was hygiene products for girls when they were at a point of maturity where they needed feminine hygiene products.
Yeah.
And they were like, look, if we don't have these girls just don't come to school.
That's right.
And they don't get educated. And there was just this amazing moment where there was this woman who happened to be at the table, who happened to be a teacher, who just sits there and shakes her head and goes, y'all think that's not happening here? That's happening in every school, in every inner city in the United States. If girls don't get hygiene products at their high schools, they don't go to school the next day. It's just jaw-dropping. So anyway, on behalf of my friend Carrie, thank you for what you do.
Thanks for sharing that.
Made a massive difference to her.
I'm so glad.
Super encouraging to us. Where should people go online if they want to check out this program?
They can just visit our website. They open periodically. It's not always happening, but if you sign up for a mailing list or you follow me on social media, you'll see that it's happening again. You can send the application to teachers you might know, or you can apply for yourself, or you can contribute.
Sharon McMahon, the book is great. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for making time to be with us today on The Bulletin.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Mike.
The Bulletin is a production of Christianity Today. It's produced and moderated by Clarissa Mall. The associate producer is Leslie Thompson. This episode was mixed by Kevin Morris, theme music by Dan Phelps. Eric Petrick and Mike Cosper are the executive producers of CT Media Podcasts, and Matt Stevens is our senior producer. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening.